3 years ago, the man Simone Banks loved died in a plane crash. She scattered his ashes over Lake Michigan as the sun set, her hands trembling so badly her best friend Tasha had to help her hold the urn. She mourned him through endless sleepless nights, through holidays that felt hollow, through the phantom weight of an engagement ring she'd placed in a drawer because wearing it hurt too much. Then, desperate and drowning in debt, she married someone else, a billionaire, a stranger who offered her a contract and a way out of the darkness. For 2 years, she convinced herself it was just business, just survival. But last night, at her husband's private art gallery opening, Simone looked across the room and saw him. Derek, alive. Standing behind a marble sculpture with tears streaming down his face, staring at her like she was a ghost. This is her story. Simone had always believed in simple, honest love, the kind her parents had before her father passed when she was 12, the kind that didn't need wealth or status, just commitment and truth. When she met Derek Lane 4 years ago at a community fundraiser, she thought she'd found exactly that. He was an architect with kind eyes and big dreams, and he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. They dated through Chicago winters and summers, saving money in a shared envelope labeled Our Future, planning a small backyard wedding that would cost more in love than dollars. Derek's parents were different, cold, wealthy in that old money way that made them look at Simone like she was tracking dirt through their pristine lives. His mother barely spoke to her at family dinners, and his father once asked Derek, loud enough for Simone to hear, whether he was absolutely certain about this choice. But Derek always defended her. He'd take her hand and say that she was his choice, his only choice, and nothing else mattered. Simone believed him completely. 2 months before their wedding, Derek boarded a private charter plane to Seattle for what he said was an important client meeting. Simone kissed him goodbye at their apartment door, told him to be safe, and went to work teaching 23 kindergartners about the letter Q. 14 hours later, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was clinical, apologetic, devastating. The plane had gone down over the Pacific Ocean, no survivors. They'd recovered personal effects, Derek's wallet, his watch, fragments of luggage. The Coast Guard had called off the search. The funeral was a blur of black clothing and hollow condolences. Derek's parents arranged everything, barely consulting Simone, treating her like an inconvenient footnote to their son's life. His mother approached her at the reception, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "You know," she said quietly, venomously, "he would have outgrown you eventually. You were a phase, dear, a rebellion. It's better this way." Simone couldn't even respond. She just stood there, a small urn of ashes in her hands that the funeral director had given her, and felt something inside her die alongside Derek. The months after were darker than anything Simone had ever experienced. She moved through her days like a sleepwalker, teaching her students with a smile that never reached her eyes, then going home to an apartment that felt haunted by memories. The bills started piling up. Derek, it turned out, had debts she'd known nothing about, credit cards maxed out, personal loans from shadowy lenders. The collectors called constantly and legally, as his fiancé who'd co-signed on their apartment lease and several accounts, she was responsible. Her teacher's salary couldn't cover it. She was drowning and the water was rising fast. 6 months after Derek's death, Simone was working a second job as a server at upscale private events. The money was decent, and the work kept her mind busy enough that she couldn't think about the empty space beside her in bed. One evening, she worked a dinner party at a penthouse overlooking the city. The guests were the kind of wealthy that made their privilege invisible to themselves, the kind who didn't see servers as people. Simone had learned to make herself small, to be efficient and silent. She was refilling drinks when a woman named Helen Morrison, dripping in diamonds and disdain, snapped her fingers at Simone like she was summoning a dog. "Excuse me, do you even understand English? I said no ice. Are you stupid?" The table went quiet, watching. Another guest laughed. "These people can't even follow simple instructions," someone murmured. Simone felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her expression neutral. She took the glass, remade the drink perfectly, and set it down without a word. Her hands shook, but she didn't let them see. Across the room, Lawrence Prince watched the entire interaction. He was a 35-year-old tech billionaire, the kind of man whose name appeared in Forbes and whose company was revolutionizing education technology. He was also black, and he recognized the particular flavor of disrespect Simone was enduring. He'd experienced versions of it his entire life, even with all his money and power. After the dinner ended and the guests left, Lawrence found Simone in the service hallway as she was packing up. "I need a wife," he said without preamble. Simone stared at him, thinking he was either drunk or insane. She tried to walk past him, but he stepped into her path, not threatening, just insistent. "Hear me out. It's a business arrangement. 2 years, contract marriage. You'll be compensated, $5 million, all your debts cleared. After 2 years, you walk away financially free, and we both move on with our lives." Simone's first instinct was to refuse. It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. But Lawrence explained calmly, rationally, his board of directors wanted him to appear stable and settled before they'd approve a major expansion. His parents were pressuring him to marry within their elite social circle. He wanted someone real, someone who wouldn't want his lifestyle permanently, someone who could play a role and then leave. "You keep your life, I keep mine," he said. "We're colleagues, not lovers. Separate bedrooms, public appearances only, just business." Simone was 3 months behind on rent. She had bill collectors threatening legal action. She was exhausted, grieving, and desperate. 2 nights later, she signed the contract in Lawrence's lawyer's office, her signature shaky but determined. She told herself it was just survival, just a way to breathe again. She moved into Lawrence's penthouse with a single suitcase and Derek's photo hidden at the bottom, and on their wedding day at City Hall, she felt nothing but numb resignation. They posed for a single photograph, shook hands, and went to their separate bedrooms. Simone cried herself to sleep that first night, whispering apologies to Derek's memory. But Lawrence Prince was nothing like she expected. He was kind, quietly, and consistently. He never pressured her, never made her feel like she owed him anything beyond their agreement. When they attended his corporate events together, he introduced her with genuine warmth and respect. When his business associates ignored her or spoke over her, he made a point of asking for her opinion, of making space for her voice. It wasn't romantic, but it was decent, and decency was more than Simone had experienced in a long time. Still, his world was brutal. Lawrence's circle was full of people who saw Simone as exactly what she was, an outsider who didn't belong. His business partner, Preston Whitley, was the worst. He was a smug white man who'd inherited his position and his attitude, and he took every opportunity to remind Simone of her place. At a corporate dinner 3 months into the marriage, Preston's wife Vanessa asked loudly, "So Simone, where did you two meet? A literacy program?" The table erupted in laughter. Simone sat frozen, fork halfway to her mouth, feeling humiliation burn through her. She wanted to disappear, to run, but she stayed. She finished her meal in silence and excused herself to the restroom where she cried quietly into her hands. Lawrence found her afterward. He drove her home without a word, and the next morning Vanessa was removed from a prestigious charity board she'd been desperate to chair. Lawrence never mentioned it directly, but Simone understood. Later that week he told her, "You don't deserve their cruelty. And for what it's worth, you're smarter than all of them combined." Simone didn't quite believe him, but the words planted a seed. As months passed, something unexpected happened. Simone and Lawrence became friends. Real friends. They started having late-night conversations over Chinese takeout, talking about everything from childhood memories to philosophy to the crushing loneliness of their respective lives. Lawrence admitted he'd never been in love, had never trusted anyone enough to let them close. Simone told him about Derek, about the guilt she felt for being alive when he wasn't, about her fear that she'd never stop loving a ghost. They were two lonely people finding companionship in an arrangement that was supposed to be strictly transactional. Simone also discovered she had a mind for business. Lawrence's company focused on education technology, and when he casually mentioned a problem with their financial projections one evening, Simone looked at the numbers and spotted an error his entire accounting team had missed. Lawrence started asking her opinion more often. She'd been teaching herself accounting and business analysis during her sleepless nights, and her insights were sharp and practical. She began consulting on his education division, and for the first time in years, Simone felt intellectually alive. 14 months into their marriage, Lawrence's company faced its biggest crisis. They were about to lose a $500 million education contract to a mysterious overseas competitor whose bid was inexplicably perfect. The board was in chaos, and several members blamed Lawrence for being distracted by his new wife. During an emergency board meeting that Simone attended as Lawrence's guest, she studied the competitor's proposal and noticed something everyone else had missed. The financial projections were nearly identical to Lawrence's internal documents. Someone was leaking information. Simone proposed a plan: feed different false information to each board member through carefully controlled channels. Whichever fake detail appeared in the competitor's next proposal would reveal the traitor. The board members looked at her like she'd suggested reading tea leaves. Preston sneered openly. "This is embarrassing, Lawrence. We should listen to a kindergarten teacher about corporate espionage. Control your wife." The room went silent, waiting for Lawrence's response. He looked at Preston, then at Simone, and said calmly, "We do it Simone's way." 2 weeks later, the trap worked perfectly. The leak was exposed, and it was Preston himself who'd been selling information to a shell company he secretly owned. The scandal was devastating for him and vindicating for Simone. Lawrence publicly credited her strategy, and the board, humbled and impressed, offered her a VP position. She declined, saying she wanted to stay connected to teaching but agreed to consult regularly. For the first time since Derek's death, Simone felt powerful, valuable, seen. That night she sat alone in her bedroom and took Derek's photograph from her drawer. She looked at his frozen smile, at the man she'd planned to marry, and whispered, "I have to let you go now. I hope you understand." She put the photo away in a box, and it felt like closing a chapter. She realized with both sadness and relief that she was falling in love with Lawrence, not because he'd saved her, but because he'd given her the space to save herself. 18 months into their marriage, Lawrence opened a private art gallery. It was his passion project, a space dedicated to showcasing Black artists who'd been historically overlooked by the mainstream art world. The opening night was intimate, just 50 carefully selected guests, and Simone wore an emerald dress that Lawrence had bought her, saying only, "This color suits you." As they stood together looking at the paintings, his hand resting naturally on her lower back, Simone felt something shift. This wasn't pretend anymore. This was real, and it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She was standing alone, admiring a painting of a Chicago street scene, when she felt eyes on her. It was a physical sensation, intense and unsettling. Simone turned slowly, scanning the gallery, and her gaze landed on a man partially hidden behind a marble sculpture near the far wall. He was thinner than she remembered, older with a beard that changed the shape of his face. But his eyes were the same. His eyes were Derek's eyes. The champagne glass slipped from Simone's hand and shattered on the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. The gallery went quiet. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process what she was seeing. Derek's face was stricken, tears streaming down his cheeks, and then he turned and ran toward the exit. Simone chased him without thinking, ignoring Lawrence's confused voice calling her name, pushing through guests out into the rain-soaked Chicago street. She caught him in an alley 2 blocks away. Derek was collapsed against a brick wall, sobbing into his hands. "You're dead," Simone heard herself say, her voice hollow and strange. "I buried you. I scattered your ashes. I buried you." Derek looked up at her with devastated eyes and whispered, "I know." "God, Simone, I know, I'm so sorry. They ended up in a 24-hour diner, Derek across the booth from Simone, and Lawrence sitting beside her like a silent guardian. The story Derek told was almost too bizarre to believe. He'd been in massive gambling debt, money owed to dangerous people who didn't negotiate or forgive. They'd given him a choice: fake his death and work for them overseas in a money laundering operation, or die for real. The plane crash had been staged. Derek had chosen survival, telling himself he'd escape and come back for Simone within months. But the people who owned him never let him go. For 3 years, Derek had been essentially a prisoner in Eastern Europe, moving money through shell corporations watched constantly, unable to contact anyone from his old life. 6 months ago, he'd finally escaped with evidence against the organization. He'd been hiding in Chicago working with the FBI, and he'd seen Simone's wedding announcement in the society pages. He'd been watching from afar, too terrified and ashamed to approach, knowing he'd destroyed her. "I came to the gallery to see you one last time before I disappeared into witness protection," Derek said, his voice breaking. "I thought it would give me closure. But seeing you there, happy, with him, I couldn't just leave without trying, without seeing if there was any chance." "Stop," Simone said, and her voice was ice. "You let me mourn you. You let me scatter ashes." Whose ashes were they, Derek? He didn't know. The whole thing had been orchestrated by people he'd never seen. Simone felt rage surge through her, hot and purifying. "I loved you. I would have faced anything with you. Danger, debt, death threats, I didn't care. But you chose to make me think you were dead. You chose to let me grieve a lie." "I was protecting you," Derek pleaded. Simone laughed bitterly. "No. You were protecting yourself. You were a coward, and you destroyed me because it was easier than trusting me with the truth." Derek finally looked at Lawrence, really looked at him, and said quietly, "I don't expect you to understand. She was mine first." Lawrence's response was calm and devastating. "She's not anyone's. She's her own person, and you gave up any claim the moment you let her grieve a lie." He turned to Simone, and his voice softened. "Whatever you need. Whatever you decide, I'm here. Even if you choose him, I'm here." In that moment, Simone understood that Lawrence loved her. Not possessively, not selfishly, but completely and selflessly. The realization nearly broke her. Simone took 3 days away from both men. She stayed with Tasha, barely sleeping, working through the tangled emotions. She'd loved Derek, the Derek she thought she knew, but that man might never have existed. The man who sat across from her in that diner was a stranger who'd chosen deception when he should have chosen trust. Lawrence had started as a contract, a business arrangement, but he'd become her partner, her best friend, the person who saw her brilliance when the world saw only a server or a teacher. He'd never lied to her. He'd given her space to heal and grow and become powerful in her own right. Derek came to Tasha's apartment on the third day, desperate and pleading. He was turning evidence over to the FBI the next morning, and then he'd be free, relocated, given a new identity and a fresh start. "Come with me," he begged. "We can start over. I still love you the way I always did. Doesn't that matter?" Simone's heart broke for what might have been. "It matters," she said gently, "but love isn't enough when trust is gone. And Derek, I don't think I love who you became. I love who I thought you were, but that person is dead. He died 3 years ago, and he's not coming back." When Simone returned to Lawrence's penthouse, she found him on the balcony staring at the city lights. He looked like a man preparing for goodbye, his shoulders tense, his expression resigned. "I'm not leaving," Simone said quietly. Lawrence turned, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "Derek was my past," she continued, stepping closer. "A beautiful past I'll always cherish, but you're my present, you're my future, you're my choice." "Our contract ends in 6 months," Lawrence said carefully. "You don't have to." Simone kissed him, cutting off his words, pouring everything she felt into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered, "I'm not staying because of a contract. I'm staying because I love you, because you saw me when I couldn't see myself, because you gave me the space to heal without demanding anything in return. 6 months later, Simone and Lawrence remarried in a small ceremony with only their closest friends. Derek had entered witness protection, and before he left, he and Simone met one last time in Millennium Park. "You deserve someone who chooses you every single day," Derek said, and for the first time, he sounded like the man she'd once loved. "I see now that I never did. I'm glad you found real happiness." They said goodbye without anger, just closure and sadness and acceptance. At the wedding reception, Lawrence's elderly lawyer, Mr. Hughes, pulled Simone aside. "There's something you should know," he said gently. "Lawrence will never tell you, so I will." He revealed that Lawrence had never needed a contract wife. His board had never pressured him. His parents had never cared about him settling down. That night at the dinner party 18 months ago, Lawrence had watched Simone being humiliated, had seen her grace and strength and dignity, and had fallen for her instantly. He'd invented the entire contract marriage story as a way to help her without making her feel like charity. Simone stood frozen, processing this revelation. Lawrence appeared, glaring at Hughes. "You promised you wouldn't." But Simone cut him off. "Why?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Why would you do that?" Lawrence took her hands. "Because in that moment, watching you refuse to break, I saw something extraordinary. You didn't need saving. You just needed an opportunity. I wanted to give you that without making you feel small." "You could have just helped me directly," Simone said. Lawrence smiled sadly. "Would you have accepted? Or would your pride have made you refuse?" She realized he was right. She would have refused charity, would have drowned rather than accept a handout. "So you loved me from the beginning?" she asked. "From the moment I saw you remake that drink with shaking hands but a steady heart," Lawrence confirmed. "Yes." Simone laughed through tears, overwhelmed and grateful and completely in love. "You're insane," she said. "Probably," Lawrence agreed, "but I got to spend 2 years watching you realize how extraordinary you are." "Worth it." They returned to their reception, but everything had changed. What Simone had thought was a business arrangement had always been a love story. What had started as survival had become her salvation, and the man she thought was saving her was actually the one who'd seen she never needed saving at all, just someone to witness her strength until she could see it herself. Derek's death taught Simone to grieve. His return taught her to let go. But Lawrence taught her something more valuable, her own worth. Sometimes the person meant for you isn't the one you thought you'd love forever. Sometimes it's the one who sees your strength when the world sees nothing at all. Never let anyone make you feel small. Your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it. It's inherent, unchangeable, yours. And somewhere out there is someone who will see your light, even in your darkest moments, even when you can't see it yourself. Don't settle for being someone's phase or their escape plan. Wait for the person who chooses you every single day with eyes wide open and a heart full of certainty. That's not just love. That's partnership. That's everything.